very grubby diff. And it is somewhat different to the other one. Have a look at the shit. We've got that there. Axle housing's about the same length. This one's much shorter. And look in here. Oil seals. They didn't have those on the other one. So I accidentally ordered some inner axle housing oil seals, so it's possible I might have them, which is a good thing. That's a good accident. This is my very special diff extraction method, using its own weight to pull itself down. You may wonder why it's not level. I ran out of wood. Gently tapping around the edge. Oh, I've already got movement. Oh, there we go. Well, we've got a differential out on the bench, and we've already seen differentials before, so hopefully we're not going to see too much of this one. We need to point out, however, that it looks like there's been a bit of water got into this one. We can see all that superficial corrosion on the outside of, can't remember what that big thing's called. And if we have a look inside the housing itself, there's a lot of scunge. And as I poke around in there, I can feel crunchy bits. So probably bits of corrosion. And then there's also a couple of pieces that almost feel like metal shavings. But I can only hope not. So let's have a closer look at the pinion and crown wheel. Superficially, it looks pretty good. No different to the other one. What we'll do is subject it to a few of our dial gauge tests, and if it passes, you won't see it again. If it fails, then we'll be going into it in more depth. Let's hope for the former rather than the latter. Well, if anything, I'd say the backlash is a little tight. Not seeing any chipped teeth or broken pieces. It all looks fairly intact. I think it's just going to be new seals, new gaskets, and put it back in. We're about to take out the bushings from the front spring, and before we do so, I'd like to direct your attention to this train wreck. So although that is a war of attrition and quite difficult, the technique does work, but it has other benefits as well. Now, for most of us, at least some stage, life doesn't always go as planned. It can be pretty tough. Consider this scenario. Your dog leaves you for your best mate, and your wife forgets your birthday. That can put a person into a really dark place. I advise grabbing some leaf springs and beating the bushings out, because it can put life into perspective. No matter how tough things are, it can be worse. With all that being said, I followed the advice of some viewers and I've created my own bush press. And this thread is just some of that, I suppose it's that galvanised cheap stuff out of the hardware store. It's not recommended for this job, but we're going to try it anyway. I have some washers and I'm going to put them on. There's a nut at the end. And then I'm going to put on my spacing socket. This one is a 19mm. I want it to be smaller than the diameter there of the spring bush. Now I'm going to put on my pushing socket. The 21mm seems to fit perfectly, so that one's going to go in there. That's my pusher. Now I'm going to insert the entire thread through, and on the other end I'm going to put on my receiver, which is simply a bit of pipe that I cut off that length over there. That goes over here, and that's going to let the bush slide into it. Now I've got my big blocky kind of washer thing, and on the end of that I'm going to put a nut. See, I've been practicing, and that'll screw on there. There we go. Lock everything into place. 19mm or 18mm, no, that's not right. It's supposed to be a 3/4. Where the fuck's that? 19mm and 3/4. They fit the nuts pretty well. Place them on. Now before we get too excited and start cranking, we're going to add on WD-40 onto the socket to allow it to slide on in a lot more easier. Now a lot of us fellows are get a little queasy when we start talking about our deep and inner feelings, but I love this stuff. WD-40. Yeah, shameless when it comes to expressing my affection for this product. There we go, spray that on there. And now we can start cranking. Oh, there's movement. Still in a little bit. But, we'll sort that out with one of my favourite tools. Share a lot in common with. Voila! One spring bushing. And not a drop of sweat on my person. I am living proof that monkeys can be trained and old dogs can learn new tricks. With that mission accomplished, we can now focus on the bushes that run through the chassis, but they're a different kettle of fish altogether. I did a preliminary test push with my invention on those, and it did not go well for this. Galvanized threading is too soft. Once the going gets too tough, the threads start to buckle up and not work. But you can also see maybe that this piece of steel has almost a banana-like shape to it. So it's not going to work. To combat that, I've invested in, I think this is stainless steel. It was expensive anyway. So I'm going to cut one of them to shape. And then my third option is the thread in a butterfly jack, which was $16 off Amazon and possibly is no better than this. It's cost more than the jack. Got a bit of a shake up on our inventory for this one. We've got our stainless steel thread that's cut the size. And then just to start things off as my receiver, I'm using this 36mm socket, which is not deep enough to receive the bushing. But it does have a nice big broad front on it, and it's wider than the pipe. So it fits over there up against the chassis more snugly. So once that bush is about a third of the way out, then we'll have to swap over and use the pipe that you can see doesn't fit so well. Other than that, we're ready to give it a try. Now it appears that we're getting some progress with the breaker bar. There's a few issues we're running into. The stainless steel thread's doing very well. The thing is though that if you push too hard, these standard issue hardware nuts, their threads rip out. And also, if your socket's a little bit too small, like I started with, you get a banana bend in your thread, and that's not good. So the 21 is actually really good, it slots in there. The washers get all crimped up. That can't help with the ease of threading that nut either. So that can be a problem. But although we're getting it pushing in on one side, it doesn't seem to be pushing out on the other side. So I'm a little bit flummoxed. Well, I got hoodwinked on this one for a couple of reasons. The first is I made an assumption. We all know what the mother of assumptions is, don't we? I assumed that this bush here was going to be for the chassis, for the rear of the front springs. It may work. However, I've got the workshop manual here before me, and as we look in here, you can see clearly there are two little half bushes that fit into each side of the frame. And I saw them on the internet for sale as well. So we're going to have to look into alternative measures to get them out, which may involve surgery. The other bush The other bush doesn't want to move. It's not moving at all. Sizzling. Oh! Look at that. Now we've burned the guts out of the other one, you can see here, in amongst all the rust and shit and grime, clearly there's like two little sub bushes in there with a split in the middle. So that's what's happened on the other side. One of the bushes started to move, hit the other one, and then that didn't work. Gonna want a brand new blade for this delicate manoeuvre with a heavy weapon. Try and make sure that it's dead straight. Now we got this bush is moving in its housing. Now I have to say, I don't recommend any of these techniques at all. They work, but the chances of damaging your frame, unfortunately, I think are way too high. This is a last ditch resort for something that's not going to come out, or, you know, for someone who just doesn't have the tools. So there we are. Yep, there we go. But they're out. It proves that it can be done. You have a look in there, you can see I cut too deep. There's a little scour mark where the saw went into the frame. So I thought maybe there'd be a little layer of rust in between the two metals, but there wasn't. It was clean all the way through. So keep that in mind if you ever do some surgery like I've just done there. Very dangerous stuff. Despite having messed up a little bit there, I'm very surprised that inner housing's in quite good condition. I feared that it was all going to be rusted out and very nasty, but I think we're in relatively good stead there. Been a while since I've been dressed in formal attire for these videos, but it's a stinker of a day. Too hot for coveralls. Anyway, we're going to replace the front bushes in the chassis. And rather than use two little sub bushes, I'm going to use this guy. It's the right width and size. And the way I see it, that rust and stuff can get gathered up in between the little gap on the sub bushes. With this one, not so much. The sub bushes were impossible to remove without surgery, so why not see if this works? And I have 3 of them. Now, it was advised by some that I put this in the freezer, shrink it, make it easier to go in the little hole. Now, I did try that with this one, and my plan was, a little barbaric I know, was to use the shackle pin, and it got stuck about there because it's a snug fit as it is. So when I went to hammer it in, and then I was going to hammer it into the hole, look what it did. Push the rubber through to one side. So that bush is buggered. I'm going to steer away from the freeze method on this exercise and go for the more conventional lube it up and press it in. Alright, at our workstation. We have our press. Now, when you're shoving the bush out, okay, you've got your 21mm socket there all lined up. You've got the housing to keep everything in line. All right, well, when you're pushing them in, you can get this going on. All right, that makes sense, and that can cause problems. So to circumvent that, we have these 2 chunky washers with big enough holes on them to fit over that little nub. So they're going to go in there like that, and then our 21mm socket will fit over, and then that's got something firm and reliable to press against and keep it in line. And then of course, once it gets to the end, that tells you that the bush has gone in far enough. Alrighty-o. Now we're going to clean up the hole with some gas. using my toothbrush. Needs a good clean as well. Anyway, you have a slightly gasoline flavour for a few days afterwards, but spick and span. Does wonders for your teeth. A little bit of gas. Some anti-seize grease. I want to smear it in there, but also fill in those scars that I made when I used the Sawzall, so that rust doesn't form in there. A bit of liberal coating. Any excess, I'm sure, will be squeezed out the other end. Bastard. Bonza. Hey, cricket. Bonza. Hey. These buggers have been wrapped up for a while. We're going to downscale from our 36mm socket to a more humble 30, because that'll fit over this thing a little better. Right. Bush has to go on there. Need to give myself a bit of clearance. Straightening itself out, that's good. There we go. I do like these homemade presses. Hey? Revolutionary. Now that was a wild ride, wasn't it? Nearly an entire episode of watching a man uninstall and reinstall bushes. What better TV can you ask for? Now, as an old dog learning new tricks, one of the new ones I have learned is the value of social media and reaching out to folk much more smarter than myself. You may recall in the previous episode I was whining about the cover plate of the steering box and the scour marks within, concerned that it was an irreparable and irreplaceable piece. Well, I got some good advice. Some folks said just to skim it with sandpaper, grease it up, put it back on and you're good to go. Others said to take it to a machining shop and have it milled, and that's the advice I took. Down to Dan's Metalworks in Santa Rosa I went, and he had a look at it, and he said, the process you're asking for is going to be quite expensive, possibly up to half the value of the steering box itself. Well, on closer inspection he said, hang on a minute, these scour marks are most likely not from that roller, and not from where, but how it came off the factory floor back in the 1957. And then you know what he said? Scrub it with sandpaper, grease it up, chuck it back on and you're good to go.